What's going on, guys? So I have a fun one in store for you today. We're going to be looking at weightlifting shoes, deadlift slippers, and deadlift shoes, and comparing each model, because if you're newer to strength sports or more specialty shoes like any of these up here, you may be a little bit confused as to when should I use each? What is each most effective for? So today we're going to answer all of those questions, and as always, everything is timestamped down below, so if you are interested in anything specific, check out the timestamps. But let's dive in. What are deadlift shoes? So deadlift shoes are shoes designed for deadlifts. Pretty simple and straightforward, right? But why are they called deadlift shoes? Because if you look at this model right here, which is the Sabo deadlift shoes, it looks very similar to a wrestling shoe. So some things to keep in mind with deadlift shoes, and what most deadlift shoes actually have in common, is that they're gonna have minimal stack height. So pretty much the material that separates the foot from the ground is very minimal. Similar to like barefoot shoes, they're really trying to optimize your overall ground contact and surface area with the foot on the ground. You're also gonna have additional midfoot support here. So obviously when you're pulling weight, especially if you are in a sumo position and you're really pushing that ground away, so you're really pushing out with these shoes, you don't want the shoe to collapse, or you don't want that midfoot to kind of roll over. So a lot of deadlift shoes will add additional straps here, and that's why they'll also adapt a high top construction like the Sabo deadlift shoes. And also deadlift shoes are gonna slightly have wider toe boxes up here to promote full toe splay, to really allow you to grip and ground the feet into the floor to maximize your deadlift performance. All right, so now 3 benefits of deadlift shoes is number 1, if you are a powerlifting athlete and you plan to compete, you're gonna need a shoe for deadlifts. Now, most closed toe options will be approved for local competitions, and obviously if you're competing at a national or an international level, look into the rules before you do so. But the reason a lot of folks will reach for deadlift shoes is because they are powerlifting competition approved. The second benefit of deadlift shoes is that they are so specific in nature, and if you're only wearing them for deadlifts, they will generally last a while. So similar to any other specific training shoe, if you limit their use to the specificity of where you intend to use them, they should last you a while. The third benefit is that since they are built for deadlifts, they're gonna help you really ground the feet into the floor because there's minimal stack height, slightly wider toe box positions in most deadlift shoes. So they're gonna help you really optimize your overall deadlift performance by limiting how much material is separating the foot from the floor. So now, are deadlifting shoes worth it? It's tough to say, because truthfully, if you're planning to compete in powerlifting, then they could be worth it because it matches the specificity of your sport and training. Now, for most folks, if you are just a recreational lifter and you want to maximize your performance with deadlifts, you don't necessarily need to go invest something like $90 into a Sabo deadlift shoe. Instead, you could just use Converse, Vans, you could pull barefoot, you could pull in your socks. Really anything that's gonna allow you to minimize the material between your foot and the floor will be a really good bet, and it could save you some money. Barefoot shoes are also a phenomenal option, and you could wear those for other forms of training, something that you cannot do with deadlift shoes. So if they're worth it, it really comes down to the specificity of how you plan to use them. If you are a powerlifter and you plan to compete in those deadlift shoes, then they could be worth it. That way you can train in them and compete in them, and you have some continuity in your training and your competition. If you're a recreational lifter, you may want to look into other models that will work just as well for deadlifts and that you can wear in a more versatile manner. And now when chatting on how should deadlift shoes fit, I usually say have about 0.2 to 0.5 inches. So just about 0.2 to ½ inch, and the toe box is usually a good bet. Now, obviously, your overall forefoot width and just your overall foot anatomy will play a large role into how comfortable some shoes are gonna feel for you. But with deadlift shoes specifically, I actually like a slightly snugger feel, only because we're only using them for deadlift, which is a static strength movement. We don't necessarily need to worry about jamming the toes and things like jumps, etc., like we do with cross-training shoes. So in the context of deadlifts and really focusing on allowing yourself to feel secure in your shoe, I often say a little bit snugger is not necessarily a bad thing. So try to walk the line to where the shoe is not necessarily squeezing your toes to where they can't fully toe splay, but also not having it so loose to where you're sliding around, which could actually be a problem for sumo deadlifts. All right, so now walking down the line here, what are deadlift slippers? So I like to say that deadlift slippers are just swim booties with additional straps, but essentially what deadlift slippers are they are slippers designed to promote your overall deadlift performance by minimizing the amount of material that separates the foot from the floor. Essentially, these are one of the best bets for you if you really love to train barefoot in the deadlift when you can't do so. So if you're competing, for example, and you need to have that closed toe, a deadlift slipper is a really good option for the folks that love to train barefoot on a regular basis. All right, so 3 benefits that come along with deadlift slippers is number 1, once again, they are approved for most local powerlifting competitions. Obviously, you're gonna need to check the rules before you use these for your comp, but for most competitions, especially at a local level, all you need is that closed toe, and they will allow deadlift slippers. Like I wore swim booties to my last meet, for example. The second benefit with this style of footwear, especially for deadlifts, is that if you really love to train barefoot and you can't necessarily do so because of competition purposes or because you're in like a big box gym where they frown upon having bare feet all over the platforms in the gym, you can use these and they are a really great option for matching that barefoot feel. Like you could take out the insole in this model and pretty much it's just this really thin layer of rubber here separating you from the floor. So you're gonna be able to maximize that overall barefoot feel while still wearing a shoe and not getting yelled at by the folks who work at the gym. The third benefit with this style of footwear is that they are cost efficient. So if you don't want to necessarily invest $90 into something like a deadlift shoe or like a wrestling shoe, which is like $60, you can also get these. These are about like $30. This is the Lifting Large deadlift slipper. So they're a cost efficient option and they will last a while if you only wear them for deadlifts. And with the midfoot support here, they are a tad bit better than just buying swim booties because they are gonna help you lock down, especially for sumo deadlifters who are really trying to push that floor apart. You obviously don't want the slipper rolling under here. So with this material that is a bit more light, that neoprene, these additional straps really help kind of lock that foot down. So they are a good cost efficient option for those who want to maximize their deadlift performance and want that overall barefoot feel. All right, so now let's ask the question, are deadlift slippers worth it? If you're a competition focused powerlifting athlete, then I do think they could be worth it if you want to save a little bit of money and you love having a more minimalist feel when you are deadlifting. So if you love to train barefoot, I think these are a comparable option to that when you can't necessarily train obviously barefoot or compete barefoot on the platform. You need a closed toe, so this is a really good option for you. Plus, with the price of like $30 USD, this isn't necessarily gonna break the bank, so they can be a nice little easy option to just throw into your gym bag and bring with you when you're really trying to focus on your deadlift focused goals. So if they're worth it, it really comes down to what style of footwear you like best when you're deadlifting. If you can train barefoot or if you have barefoot shoes, honestly, just stick with those. You don't need to necessarily get deadlift slippers because that's gonna pretty much replicate what this is gonna give you. But again, if you are somebody who trains in a big box gym, or if you plan to compete and you like the feeling of having a barefoot style shoe, then this could be really worth it for you. So when it comes to how deadlift slippers should fit, I always suggest finding either a true to size model or something that's actually a little bit tighter. Because we have a neoprene upper here, it's obviously not that secure. So if we have a ton of room in the toe box, or if we're kind of swimming around in this model, we may actually get a little bit of foot overlap here. So when we're like driving out in the sumo, for example, and really pushing the floor apart, we might get a little bit of overhang here in the neoprene with our shoe if we're not able to get these shoes tight enough and secure enough. So when it comes to their fit, I would suggest looking for a fit that is about like 0.3 inches of toe room or down. And that way you can make sure that this is gonna feel very secure on your foot and you're not gonna have any foot overhang due to stretching out the neoprene due to excessive room in your slipper. So now what are weightlifting shoes? Also referred to as squat shoes and lifting shoes. These are shoes designed with a very stable outsole and purposely elevated heel to promote your overall lifting mechanics in things like squats, weightlifting movements, and any other exercise where you really want that knee to track over the toe. Basically, by elevating the heel, we're gonna put our foot into a plantar flex position, which can then help and assist with putting our body into an environment that feeds better into dorsiflexion. These do not increase ankle range of motion. However, by putting our heel at this elevated height, we can actually achieve better lifting mechanics in regard to hitting depth and keeping a slightly more upright torso because we have an elevated heel to sit back on, and we're in an environment to where the ankles and shins can dorsiflex a little bit better while maintaining the mechanics we are after. All right, so now when chatting on the benefits of weightlifting shoes, I will say I have filmed a full weightlifting shoe guide video. It's gonna be linked up there, so check that out if you are interested in this style of footwear. The first benefit is the elevated heel. When we elevate the heel and we are lifting, we are gonna change our mechanics slightly. And oftentimes people will use an elevated heel to assist with maintaining certain mechanics and certain ranges of motion to help them increase their overall performance output. So obviously there's context needed here, but an elevated heel can be really useful for supporting some lifters' forms. The second benefit is that we're gonna get a very stable outsole. So if you are squatting heavy, snatching, clean and jerking, or if you just want these for accessory movements where you want that knee to track a little bit more, you're gonna have a nice stable base to lift on and really root those feet with in weightlifting shoes. Honestly, working with a wedge or weightlifting shoe is gonna be a little bit of a better bet than putting your heel onto like a plate where you can't really maximize the overall surface area that the foot is maintaining with the plate under it and the ground below it. So these can be a really great tool for helping you maintain greater surface area with the foot and the ground when you're training. The third benefit with this style of footwear is that if you plan to compete or if you are just training on a recreational basis and you only wear them for the certain activities that they are designed to support, these are gonna last you a while. So weightlifting shoes can be a slightly higher investment. However, when you understand the specificity of how they're intended to be used, they can be a really useful tool for your training. And if you limit their use to just the training styles you intend to use these with, they should last you a while. Plus, they are approved for things like weightlifting, powerlifting competitions, etc. So you have a lot of versatility with this when it comes to the specificity of their use. So now, are weightlifting shoes worth it? Like, you do not need to go necessarily spend a ton of money on weightlifting shoes. However, I do think it's worth just having a pair on hand if you ever want to train in them. You can find older models for like $80 to $120. Plus, when we talk about the elevated heel and how that can slightly shift lifting mechanics, I think there are a lot of settings where weightlifting shoes can be really beneficial. Plus, if you don't necessarily have a wedge available at your gym and you don't necessarily like elevating the heel on a plate, having a pair of weightlifting shoes around is just a nice means of being able to elevate the heel to achieve certain lifting focused goals without necessarily compromising your performance due to having a plate under your heel or not having a wedge available. Now, obviously, there's always a lot of context needed, especially when buying something very specific like weightlifting shoes. However, if you are a lifter who is very barbell focused, or you might want to compete one day, or if you're trying to understand your overall lifting mechanics a little bit better, having a pair of weightlifting shoes can be a really useful tool just to have on hand if you ever want to train with an elevated heel. So now, how should weightlifting shoes fit? Generally, I recommend having like 0.2 to 0.5 inches available up in the toe box, because that's going to usually give you enough room to really splay the toes. If we're super jammed up in the toe box, we might actually limit our toes' ability to really splay out and grip the floor. Plus, that length is usually enough, or tight enough for that matter, to prevent any heel slip. So obviously we do not want that heel slipping out if we're doing things like clean and jerks and snatches where we're coming up onto the toe. So generally 0.2 to 1/2 inch is gonna be your best bet when it comes to how weightlifting shoes should fit. You want them tight enough to where you're not gonna have that heel popping out, but you also don't want them so tight to where you can't fully splay the toes. All right guys, that wraps up our video on deadlift shoes, deadlift slippers, and weightlifting shoes, AKA squat shoes. Hopefully this video helps you contextualize if these are worth it for your lifting needs. And as always, if you have any questions, hit me down in the comments below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, guys, drop a like on the video, drop subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one.